Rolling.
I'm so high, I can hear heaven. I'm so high, does that make me a felon? Dick, tell me, does that make me a felon? Am I a felon? Am I a threat to society?
Oh, man, some would say. And don't think I haven't been asked about that by other people when it comes to you.
If they saw this dick, they would definitely accuse me of carrying a weapon without a permit. Heyo!
Wow, we got there so fast tonight already. Dang.
Yes. And that's before even introducing my co-host, Dick Francisco. You can find her on Instagram at The Dick Francisco or on Twitter at I'm Dick Francisco. You can find me on Twitter at CTS Terry or on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts by searching for the Catch the Sky podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and you'll be notified whenever we drop our weekly episodes on Wednesday. Boom. Dick.
Boom. Wednesday.
Wednesday.
I'm excited about that, by the way.
Get your humps on.
Oh, yeah, hump day. That's so
Ew.
us.
So Dick, this week we're asking if I'm a felon. No, that's not. We are discussing police. More specifically, I've noticed this trend where veterans are being specifically recruited to be police officers. And I asked myself, is this the best way to protect people? Because these guys, in the way that they were trained to do different things, isn't necessarily what is required in an urban or suburban community.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm always terrible at this. You're always better at it than I am, of referring back to episodes, but I believe we may have had an episode where I was talking about I think we were talking about mental illness probably, and PTSD in particular. It wasn't the topic, but it came up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking about kind of that difference between soldiers at war and any military personnel that are in a war zone, and then the PTSD that's felt by police. And, not to flip this whole conversation on its head, but I think at that time I was making the distinction or the argument that the PTSD that I believe can be manifested by police officers in particular, not to put it on a scale of what's worse, but that whole setting that you just mentioned for police officers versus a time of war is a really important distinction. So I think when we look at our police officers, and we all live in communities, we all, want to be safe. We all want to be able to pick up the phone if we're feeling in danger and be able to call someone that comes and helps us. And that's, what we're taught that we have this capacity to do. And those police officers who are sworn to protect and serve their community are operating under those circumstances, like you said, within an urban setting, within a neighborhood, within their own communities. And that's very different than that setting of a war, where even though there are innocent civilians in war-torn areas and in wartime, you're fighting an enemy day in and day out. That is the space you're operating in.
Right.
And our police officers are not operating that way. They're walking around, shooting some hoops, with some kids on the street in the community that they serve, and showing up at, a block watch meeting and getting called because someone's house is being broken into, or because someone's got a gun, or, how quickly their brain has to shift in the setting that they're in is so fascinating to me. And then they have to go home every day and then go and repeat that where you don't know who your enemy is versus when you're at war. You're at war. You're always on knowing you're in a war situation. That's not how our police officers operate. They switch in and out of that every day.
I'm not sure that all of them do switch in and out, and I'm concerned that some of them are just stuck in one mode. And that is why
I think that might be why we're here, right?
They seek out a job where they can continue carrying a weapon. And so I'm wondering if there's a correlation with the issues that there have been with the police in recent years and this growing trend of recruiting police officers. Like, there's an article, if you type in veterans to police officers, the first thing that comes up is an article from the Department of Justice talking about the cops office. And this is a nationwide trend. I mean, here in Erie, we boast about how 40% of our officers are former military members, which is higher than the national average, which you said is 20 to 22%, right, Dick?
Our military veterans, yeah. And so, but I want to be careful about the correlation that we're making. And so those are straight facts, which is, societally about 6 to 7% of the U.S. population serves in the military or has served in the military as of, I think, like 2020, 2021. And one of those more popular professions when military veterans, so when people come out of the military and kind of reintegrate into society, one of those more popular professions is law enforcement, specifically being a police officer. I think, and this would require either us to do a little more research or someone to do a little more research, is to look at, because I believe we're talking about police brutality now, and look at those violations of and incidences of police brutality and determine if those cases are being committed by officers that have, a military background or who have been military veterans. I think that would be a really interesting look to take at the military service background of those officers, because I'm willing to suggest, based just on my experience, that while there might be maybe integration issues that veterans, and I think we can get into that a little bit, about what veterans might go through when they come to be a police officer, which is very different than this, the environment that they're used to serving, and especially those that have served, tours of duty. But I would also like to suggest, and I use the term amateur gang members, right? Like, there's a difference between running into like an amateur gang and like a legit, like, I would rather run into the Crips and the Bloods than I would like this amateur gang that's setting up shop down at the, the strip mall, down the street from my house, because those suckers don't know like for real war or gang like violence. And so they're willing to pop a cap in anything and pull a gun out, and they're reckless. They're freaking reckless. They got like power went to their head. Where like legit gang members, like, they're not going to blow their load on just anything. They're calculated. They're better trained. And so I'm actually kind of curious to know. One of our better trained
officers was in the U.S. Army Reserve from 96 to 2004. His name is Derek Chauvin. Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying is I'd love to know how many of the officers that have been prosecuted for, because we could say just one, of course, but love to know that statistic as it correlates to police officers that have a military service background, what that looks like as it correlates to those officers that have participated in police brutality. Because I think, again, we can use a single officer and argue that it's just not okay and suggest a correlation 100%. But I think it might be a little, I wouldn't say disingenuous, but irresponsible of us, maybe.
Give me just
because I'm here to suggest that there's pros and cons to military veterans coming into law enforcement. I think it's all dependent on that transition program, because police work, and this is from two of us that prior to getting on this recording definitely agreed that we could meet the physical fitness test, and you proved it, T.
Well, yeah. I did 52 push-ups right before this episode. No stretching, no nothing. And I feel like that might be a personal record, so I'm not sure, but I'm kind of impressed that I pulled that out of my ass.
But you basically just qualified to be a police officer in most agencies because of those standards being dropped, which is why I support the influence of our combat veterans who take physical fitness seriously, because that's part of that brainwashing ingrained, because it's life or death for them, that they come and then influence those other officers, because the typical standards of our officers are dropping. And I think that I would much rather be protected by somebody who could outrun me than that officer that's knee deep in, I think they're into bagels now, no longer donuts. Just saying.
I think it was Seth Rogen actually said that cops walk up to him and say that they became cops because of him and Superbad. And he's like, that's fucking terrible. You didn't understand the whole point. Like,
that's horrifying, right? That's horrifying.
You're right. Yeah.
But it's real. Like, because it's a job that, like, not a ton of people necessarily want these days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's
climate.
Mentally taxing as well. And that's why I won't do it.
So you
Fuck
think
that.
about that. They drop those standards, and people like you and I are passing the physical fitness test to get in. Again, not the mental test, but the physical fitness. Well, hell, we're probably passing mental tests.
Oh, I mean, I could fake my way through the mental test all day long.
Oh,
that's
100%.
That's the part that's the problem, is you get, you know, people that are just smart enough to know which boxes to check, and then it's just like, oh, boy.
But you would think, when you think about how, like, police agencies operate, like, their schedules, I don't know, they vary, but generally like 4-10s. So they're working 10-hour shifts. If they have to work overtime, you know, you could get 12 hours.
Like, they need to
whatever.
do what they do on bar rescue and put these dudes under, and ladies, under a stress test.
Oh,
like,
they do that though. Yeah.
Oh, no.
You don't
You need to take them in a
it,
room. You need to fucking turn the cameras off, and you need to really
I don't know if
there.
you understand what training in police agencies looks like these days, but I'm going to tell you.
I'm talking
like,
borderline torture, Dick. I waterboard them.
I'm
talking
how
2 in the pink,
do you
1 in the
know
stink.
your local police agency?
That goes for the boys as well. You're going to get 2 up in the dick. You're going to cram 2 fingers up in their dick. You're going to find a way.
I'm going to guess I know more intimately than you what's going on in our police agencies. And I'm just going to tell you. I'm just going to tell you that
I'm going to take
the
your lack of
reality of the
response.
things that they are doing to them. It really is getting more militant, because I think they're acknowledging, you know, the realities that are out there in society, and how important the training really becomes for these people to stand by each other.
Are
no matter what, thick
and
or
finger
thin,
banging
life
involved,
or death.
Dick? This is what I need to know.
I'm not answering that question.
This is probably why I wouldn't pass the mental exam.
I'm trying to explain to you. You know what? Never mind. You fucked this up. You're dumb. You're so dumb. However, I don't know if either of us could meet the mental test. It should require to be a police officer.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
We know that. 100% we know that. So nobody hire us as police officers. But I think it comes back to, like, what is that transition program, and what are the standards that law enforcement agency has? Because being in law enforcement, and I could never do it. It's a job that I'm so grateful that our men and women who do serve in our police agencies, I'm grateful for them. But when you think about what they do day in and day out, and not just the physical toll that takes, but that mental toll and that reality of how they operate, is a lot to ask of a human being and a fellow human being of ours, right? And so when we think of the things that can stress us out, the things that stress out, say, an officer, are extreme relative to what we're used to as human beings. And so, at least in this developed country, and, you know, with all of the luxuries that we have to be, you know, living the lives that we live and being kept safe. And so I think about this on a daily basis with what it's like to be a police officer. And when you're going to go serve with somebody else, you have to know that the people next to you serving in law enforcement as well with you have your back. That's a huge thing. So when push comes to shove and shit gets real out there, you need to know that the people serving next to you are just as loyal to the job as you are and are there to protect and serve too. Have the skill set to do it, because you want to make sure that the people serving with you are competent and capable of the job that they've been tasked with. And I think that is something that, whether we like it or not, or want to think about it or not, is something that is also pretty foundational for military training. And that's not something that I'm sitting in my office during the day going, if somebody walked into this office with a gun and was going to start shooting everybody, and I will let you know, no one in my office has a gun. We're not allowed to have guns in my office. And somebody came in with a gun. Am I immediately in my brain in a protect and serve mode to save all of my coworkers? And are they the same way with me? Oh, 100% not. No, I love them to death, but we're all running for our fucking lives, right? Which is not how a police officer gets to operate. And it's not how a military, unit gets to operate. And so I think there's something really important about, how military people are trained.
Right.
That could translate really well to really good police work.
Well, they're trained to blindly follow orders and stand by while an insane person murders school children on the other side of a classroom door that's unlocked, right? Without checking. Without even checking the door. Because guess what? They didn't say check the door. The orders never came down. The orders never came down. Never said check the door. Never said check the door. So just stand there.
I'll let you continue.
I'm just saying. Fantastic police work, right?
One-off moments and emotional appeal. Because, I'm not suggesting any of these scenarios that you're using as examples are okay by any means. And in fact, I do think that, and there have been studies about this, about specifically combat veterans, and I want to be really clear about that, combat veterans coming back and integrating into the police force, that there's, again, the pros and cons to that. One of the things that they can struggle with a little bit has to do with, instead of receiving orders, giving them. And so they call that the negative mindset impact transition, where they have to readjust to both, right? Because depending on what their role was in the military, they may have been at that stage of just receiving orders versus giving orders. And so those rules of engagement change, and you have to be able to do both. And so that is one of those transitional realities. And so one of the suggestions for a transitioning program when you take veterans is that they absolutely have the mindset then, and it's already built into them to do that and to be responsive, but you have to work with that and give it the time versus just assuming it's there.
Do they take them out and toss the ball around?
So I think my understanding is they actually talk about 30, 60-day programs, and then the 6 month to 9 months where they create specialized field training experiences for them and put them in those scenarios, because I think that's another thing that
this is part of the problem, though, is how do you exist at a minimum of 18 years as a human being and then go into something for 4 years and come out so fucked that you forgot what the first 18 years was? If you're that fucked, then you probably shouldn't be serving in our police force.
So I don't know if it's about being that fucked. And this comes from somebody that does have experience with literally a human being going through that process and getting to experience it. And I don't know, and being able to acknowledge, it seemed to fuck him up pretty bad. So a couple things to that. What we are asking human beings to do when they serve in our military, especially as combat troops, and when they are going to get deployed, and the training that is put into them to do that, is inhumane. It is not a normal, natural function of our developed society that we operate and live in. So whether it's innate in us or capable, because we've proven we're capable of it, is still a huge shift. And so that shift has to be pretty drastic in order to rewire, if you will, at very least reprogram some of those places in our brain that would normally function, say, from like the human brain of, well, we're going to think logically about this, or, that fight or flight where in most circumstances, many of us would just run, and you're not supposed to under those circumstances. You have to run at it versus away from it. And so that reprogramming, in order to be successful at defending our country, and we don't need to get into whether we believe we should be defending our country or what we're defending. The point is that it's happening, right? And so that rewiring that takes place, or reprogramming that takes place, do we not believe that the ability to unprogram that exists with the proper with the proper programs? Like, I believe some people can't be reprogrammed, but I believe those people probably shouldn't have been in the military in the first place either.
Yeah, I just still struggle with the whole thing.
I understand the struggle.
How do you forget how you existed?
I don't think it's forgetting, T. I don't think it's a matter of forgetting. The brain and the mind are very, very powerful things. I think we have to remember that too.
Yeah.
Like, acknowledge that the way that we operate.
Be the person that you were.
Well, yeah, but you make that sound so easy. You and I have gone through some pretty significant shit that I would tell you to just fucking knock it off too, and you haven't.
I think about that at times, how I'm just like, oh God, I am not the same person that I used to be.
And you shouldn't be the same person you used to be, right? So I think change is healthy for us, but I think we also have to remember that as powerful as our mind is, I agree with you. We do have to remember and be cognizant of the fact that we can control so much of that. But I also want to be really, really clear that there is a reality to what trauma can do to our minds. We are complex. And so all of those neurons and the ways that our brains operate that we're still learning about is really fucking complex. And so that's why you're hearing about soldiers getting, like combat veterans, getting lobotomies. And there's certain places in your head that if you freaking just drill into it, you can like finally stop some of the PTSD that some of these folks have struggled with for years. That's why you're hearing about DMT and ayahuasca and using different substances that, start to trigger, again, from a neurological standpoint, how your brain and all those waves happening in there are operating, because it's real. It's real. And so I think we have to give ourselves also that credit that the complexity of our brains is no freaking joke, dude.
Check out episode 82 if you're interested in learning more about ayahuasca.
Right. But no, for real, I think your question then, why we're even here talking about this, and your concern is a real one, because here we are saying, there's a lot of trauma that can take place in a war zone. And then all of a sudden we're, in its simplest, broadest form here, saying we're then handing those folks guns and badges and saying, okay, off you go out into the community. Right. And then we're like, gee, I wonder why, we're having these responses to situations that are brutal and as if we're at war, and we're not. And so why are people dying at the hands of police officers? I just wanted to add a little context in the beginning to suggest that I can't sit here and say that all of those incidences have been committed by, combat veterans at any point.
Right.
When it has happened, does it beg that question? 100%. Because we have seen that integration or reintegration into society in general for veterans is super freaking hard. I could only imagine what that's like. When you go from some type of structure and completely different life every single day, and now all of a sudden you have to come and operate in this very, very different society.
But it's a society that you came from, that you supposedly love so much and went off to reprogram yourself to protect.
Yeah, but that reprogramming, you have to remember there's so many valuable things that can come from that reprogramming that our bodies and our minds thrive in too, like structure, right? Like that's a huge one, like leadership, like loyalty and support. And so like I think about that from like a camaraderie standpoint, from a collectivist versus individualistic society. So I think about like my workplace, and if I was a veteran who had come out of 4+ years of daily training, reprogramming, and then the way that I operated, literally life or death, every single day, relied upon a chain of command that showed leadership and didn't waver and was confident as all get out. Camaraderie, where I was so close with the people around me that I knew my back was covered no matter what, and I had the back of the person next to me. Service-based. It wasn't about me. It was about the guy next to me. Like, these are all things that are innate in me, right? But put me in my office place all of a sudden, and, like, good luck if my boss has leadership skills, for fuck's sake, right? He's not showing leadership at all. And I don't know, maybe can't make a damn decision, right? That's frustrating. And like, where's the loyalty? No, everybody's stabbing each other in the back to stab their way to the top. It's an office, right? I'm not talking about my office specifically, but I'm just saying everyone's in it for themselves. How do I get a raise? How do I figure out how to take off days and still get paid? How do I? And so like, And at the end of the day, the job in and of itself is not even more important. It's really all about people fucking over the system to make a paycheck and get a vacation. And I'm like, oh man, I'm already frustrated by that. But now if I was trained to protect these effing people on top of it, you're the reason I was at frickin' war was so that you have this freedom to fuck around in your workplace and fuck over your coworker next to you and try to get that promotion by working less. And then all of a sudden I have to integrate into that to support my family. And then all of a sudden I'm looking to my leadership going, well, at least you're going to have you're going to show me the way and some support. And then no, you don't have any leadership either. Yeah, that's frustrating. Right. And I will tell you that police forces are dysfunctional. And so like the amount of drama that takes place in police departments and
because
politics.
Who do they ultimately answer to? Who sets the rules for the police?
In cities, it's your elected officials and your manager. So depending on the form of government,
and at your state trooper level, it's your state elected officials, right?
Yeah. So generally, it's elected officials. That's who figures out if you get paid or not.
So this is why it's so dysfunctional.
It's all political.
Yeah, this is why it's so dysfunctional.
And then think about how frustrating that is because you're coming out of the military where nonetheless, the elected officials are still making decisions, but you're so far removed from that because you are on the ground fighting a war and all you care about is winning, protecting, and making sure the guy next to you survives and he's making sure you survive, right?
Well, let me add that this brilliant chain of command in the military is also the reason that 100,000+ people were turned to ash. Yeah. Women, children, old people in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So
yeah, and I'm not here to argue whether war is right or wrong and whether our military, and defense strategies are
a little brutal.
Oh, 100% brutal, yes, but we're brutal as human beings.
That's why I'm concerned that even the best trained dudes are just going to resort to what they're trained to do.
But maybe this is my question for you, T, is it not in all of us?
Oh, I know it's in all of us.
And would you rather have had the training to also know that you're well enough trained to use it, but perhaps trained enough not to use it as well versus maybe some of the hack-ass training that is or isn't taking place that maybe gets misused?
This is why I suggested me possibly getting into UFC is because I've said before that I've got the will to kill somebody. So I can throw me in the octagon and see what happens. Plus, I'm pretty skinny. So I think for my height and my weight, I'd have a pretty good advantage there. I might have a pretty decent reach. Right?
We're going to have to do a whole episode on UFC, but
that combined
it still
with
comes down
the impressive
to
push-up numbers is
your
definitely
impressive
working in my
push-up
favor.
number is pretty solid. But I will say UFC needs to get a little more credit for technique in the ring too, in the octagon.
Oh yeah, like my technique will just be to do some Mortal Kombat shit. I'm gonna do a fatality. I'm gonna rip somebody's spine literally out of their back.
You'll never even get close enough to their spine, is what I'm telling you.
No, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stick both of my fingers in their fucking eyes, and then my thumb in their mouth like a fucking bowling ball. And then when they bite
this
down
isn't
on it
even
real hard,
UFC now.
I'm just going to pull their whole fucking skull out of their body
Yeah.
and their
Okay.
spine.
So again,
Fatality.
this is not UFC, and I think right now, everyone, I think
UFC.
right now, T is doing his
this
job interview
not
for how
UFC.
not to get hired ever by a law enforcement agency.
I don't think that'll
or
get me
put in
hired
UFC.
anywhere.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not getting hired anywhere with that job interview just now. So I guess my question, T, since you came pretty hot and heavy on this topic, is if you're super concerned about combat veterans not being able to reprogram or unprogram to join our law enforcement agency with all of the training that they have and all of these skills, because again, the skills aren't just to kill. There's a lot that I think our military deserves credit for what they learn when they come out of that. I love working with people that have been in the military because again, they're organized, they're structured, they're logical thinkers because they had to be, and they're fucking motivated to get shit done. Love it. So
Accept,
you take
check,
the
unlock
best,
doors.
You take the best of these folks, and then what do you suggest they do, like from a reintegration into society? Because remember, you got to realize that there's a pent upness, and not to kill per se, but to put those skills to use. So how do you best treat these folks that went and, put their lives on the line for so long and reintegrate them back into society? What do you suggest is the best job for them? I'll
Whatever
say that
they
was a
wanted.
setup for failure.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because,
like whatever
again, we
they
act
wanted
like
to be, that doesn't
everybody-
involve fucking carrying a gun. Why does it always have to involve
So
carrying a gun?
you
That's my
believe-
concern, is that a lot of
you
these
believe
people
that
join the military in the first place because they feared or were concerned that they didn't have the skills to try something different. And so they're like, oh, here, I'll get a quick GI Bill and I get to shoot a gun and see the world.
So that's why people join the military.
Rise Against has a whole fucking song about this. A hero of war.
So back to your
That's
generalization.
what I'll be.
I would say that if that is those people who join the military for that reason, I agree with you, probably shouldn't then join law enforcement after. I would just like to challenge you to broaden your thinking a little bit more about the motivations of people, because they vary, just like, we just said,
Yes.
Jobs could vary. But to acknowledge that there's lots of people then and lots of types of individuals that should never carry a gun, and I wouldn't suggest that our combat veterans are the ones that shouldn't. Are there particular combat veterans who probably should never handle a gun again? Yeah, probably.
That's what I'm saying.
But not all of them.
Right.
In fact, some of them are the ones I'd probably most like protecting me if I needed protection. Because you know why? They ain't going to miss.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever seen Star Wars? Like, those stormtroopers are supposed to be trained killers as well.
You
They
and
can't
your
fucking hit shit.
references. Yeah, well, I'm not asking a stormtrooper to be my bodyguard anytime soon then.
Oh, it might happen sooner than you know.
No, I'm just
The
saying
Space
I wouldn't
Force
be
is up and
tapping.
running.
I wouldn't be tapping a stormtrooper. Then you're telling me they're a bad shot. I know a few
All
better
right,
shots.
well,
than-
hey, this space. Tell that to a Space Force vet, Dick. You're sitting here pimping the military, and now you're
Space
telling me
Force-
that you wouldn't have a stormtrooper protecting
Space
you.
Force
I
vets
think
will have to
some
be our
Space
next
Force
episode.
veterans might take offense to that.
They might.
I think they might
Yeah.
take offense to that.
Well, you can take your Space Force vets and put them up against all of the combat vets that you just offended in this episode. Let's see how this goes.
To be clear, I worked at a veterans nursing home for 3 years, serving our nation's veterans, primarily Vietnam and World War II, and I guess the Korean War as well. A lot of them. So I absolutely 100% love our veterans. I do not agree with what our military chooses to do with our poor veterans. Let me clarify that for the record. Just to get that out there. But yeah, there's going to be some offense along the way. There's definitely always going to be some offense.
Still want to see that stormtrooper vet versus American combat vet. Nonetheless, I agree with you. And I think, I think a lot of our veterans could probably agree too, relative to, especially that reintegration and coming out of service and the support that is required for that. I don't think any veteran coming out of the military is going to tell you that integration process is a piece of freaking cake from what they've been trained and learned. And again, taking those skills that are phenomenal and should be put to use. And there's so much value for these human beings and us, and then having to learn how to value them and understand them, because we frankly can't understand what their experience is if we haven't had it. But I think, how do we better as a society go, this is a part of our society that we continue to do, which is maintain a military and engage in combat. Therefore, we will continue to have combat veterans. And so what is that reintegration like? How do we as a society then support that so that we do get the best of these human beings and are here to support them in that reintegration, whether it is into the most appropriate roles in law enforcement where those skills get to be put to use, or what are those other professions that we can really see the value? Because I do think that that's, one of the worst things that happens on the health and wellness side, and then on the career side, is they come back from service, and as a society, we just don't know what to do with them, right? I imagine there was probably some of that you got to experience even peripherally working at a veteran's home of, these folks who served so long ago and probably to some degree still struggled. Those, the negative impacts and the health issues are real.
In their situation, though, a lot of them were drafted,
yeah.
right? And so
absolutely.
They were either early on in a career of some sort and had an idea of what they were doing. So when they came back, yes, they did experience a lot of those same struggles. We all know that Vietnam vets were not always looked upon highly when they returned. But they were able to integrate, at least from a professional standpoint, a little bit easier because it wasn't like a choice for them. You know what I'm saying? They had chosen something.
Yeah,
a lot of them had chosen something else already. But
they still had to come back from that type of training where not only like those health issues like depression and anger and PTSD and withdrawal, all of that people around you now can't understand because they don't have it, right? But some of those frustrations that got elevated, like I said, like that concept of a chain of command and not displaying leadership, or a lower tolerance for like things that people complain about, right? Yeah. Like that's been my experience, and I can appreciate it with veterans especially, is that idea of, like, from an experience standpoint, all things being relative, like, I'm sorry, you're complaining about what?
Yeah, some of them.
And I feel it, and
that's what
right?
I appreciated about a lot of these older dudes is they built that mental fortitude and just fucking powered through it.
Yeah.
And the reason I appreciate that is because, like, that is something I've struggled with my entire life, to see these other human beings succeed at it. Like, I applaud them. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it was easy. And that doesn't mean that they didn't struggle mightily. So I'm not taking away anything from them. I'm just saying that some of these older dudes were just like, you know what? We fucking back in my day.
No, you're absolutely right. And then again, they don't build them like they used to, right?
No.
I think that's for real too. I think one of the things, again, that I just want to think about, from a combat veteran standpoint, and I think why law enforcement does get that potential to benefit if they integrate right, and they still go through all of the psychological evaluations and medical screenings that anybody joining these law enforcement agencies should be going through, really is, we were talking earlier about feeling like some of our police agencies, especially when they've been struggling to recruit under, this current climate, that it's a hard job to get people to want to do, is to be a police officer. And so then what happens is agencies drop their standards for recruitment into police forces, and then it breeds people who probably shouldn't be police officers, and ones that do really want to protect and serve their community for all the right reasons don't want to go into that profession because, again, the climate is just it's a hostile one across the board for lots of reasons. And so that's just a setup for disaster. And I think one of the things that I can appreciate about veterans and combat veterans in particular is when it comes to those standards, specifically on the physical side, hence the reason why we were doing push-ups right before this recording, just to see if we would meet the standards, right, is, your combat veterans especially come out with some of those really positive skills of leadership, discipline, and physical fitness because they have to. And that is very, very different. The physical fitness required of your combat veterans because it is life or death for them. And so they are going to be physically fit. That's very different than what we see sometimes in our police forces.
They got a 6-pack on their dick. It's so long and thick.
Where we were talking about that not necessarily being the same as when we've all done it. We've all looked over and seen that police officer and you're like, there is no way if I started a foot chase right now, that guy's catching me.
Yeah. Oh, I did it in high school. I smoked them.
Right. 100%.
I ran into the hood of their car. I tripped over a bunch of bushes and I still smoked them.
Right. And again, our military training, generally speaking, is usually of higher caliber than that. And so that is one of those things that integrating combat veterans into the police force is not just because you get the individual benefit of that person being physically fit and that discipline being an important part of their lifestyle that's been ingrained in them, but it can also be really influential to the officers around them as well. I've seen that relative to my own local law enforcement agencies, that camaraderie and influence has been really helpful to some of the other officers because their diets are trash, their schedules and hours are trash, the lack of sleep that they get is just ridiculous. And so it really becomes extra important to stay physically fit and maintain that discipline.
Yeah, and before I say anything more and further incriminate myself, I think we should wrap this up. So,
I think we should.
So if you care to follow us or leave a comment, you may find Dick on Twitter at I'm Dick Francisco or on Instagram at the Dick Francisco, and you may find me on Instagram, Facebook, or wherever you listen to podcasts by searching for the Catch the Sky podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and you'll be notified every Wednesday when we release our new episodes. Dick, I have to go into hiding and pick a new alias, so until then,
I won't tell anybody, don't worry.
got it. Thank you for listening, and keep trying to catch the sky.